Well, a man started a company that made helpful household items. And the company was actually doing pretty well. They were very innovative, and they put out some really good products and became very successful. But there was a problem. The company was doing so well that the owner now all of a sudden had more money than he had ever had. And he decided to start taking vacations. And so he was traveling all over the place, and he wasn't there to run his company. Well, that meant there was no one really in charge. Now, there were some people who were more high up in the company and, that you could look to, but there were a couple guys who decided, well, okay, well, I'll take charge. But they both had different ideas, and they wanted to do things differently. And the owner wasn't there to say one way or the other. And so they both wanted to be in charge, and something had to be done. Well, when we read 1Kings chapter 1, we see a situation that is somewhat similar to that. And now I'm not talking about a company, but I'm talking about the nation of Israel. And we're talking about David and his rule as king. When we studied the books of Samuel, we saw that David's early struggles and his rise to power. We saw how God chose David to be king and then established his kingdom. We also noticed that David didn't do everything right. But David also confessed his sins. I mean, he committed serious sins, but he then confessed his sins, and he sought to be right before God and sought to honor God with his life. But all in all, David was very successful. And the nation was now secure. They had rest from their enemies. Now, this is where we pick up the account of Israel's history again. And at this point in time, David is old and frail and doesn't appear to be very involved in what's happening in the nation. At least not actively involved. He's just, well, you'll see, he's just trying to stay warm. And some people decide to just do things on their own and in their own way. And so let's read 1 Kings chapter 1, beginning in verse 1 through 4. He says, "Now King David was old and advanced in years, and although they covered him with clothes, he could not get warm. Therefore his servants said to him, 'Let a young woman be sought for my lord the king, and let her wait on the king and be in his service. Let her lie in your arms, and that my lord the king may be warm.' So they sought for a beautiful young woman throughout all the territory of Israel, and found Abishag the Shunammite, and brought her to the king. The young woman was very beautiful, and she was of service to the king and attended to him, but the king knew her not." Now, so David is old and cold. I know it rhymes, but this is his situation. He was old and cold. And he had bad circulation, and he just, no matter what they did, he couldn't keep warm. Even with lots of covers, lots of clothes on, he couldn't keep warm. And so what do you do if you just can't keep warm? Well, how do you warm up the king? Well, you go and find a beautiful young woman to keep him warm, to come and lay next to him and keep him warm. And she actually, this woman actually would have become one of his wives, or a concubine. But we're told that he did not know her. In other words, they did not have any sexual relationships together. But we read this and we see that sounds kind of weird. And I agree. But think about this. They had no electric blankets. They had no heat lamps. They had none of that technology like we have to stay warm. The best way to keep warm is body heat. And so this is what they did. And so again, we read it and we think, well, that's kind of strange. But we also might ask, but why are we even told about that? Is it really necessary? I mean, why are we told about Abishag and her coming and acting like a nurse for David and keeping him warm? It almost seems extraneous, unnecessary. But there is a reason for it. It emphasizes the main point of this paragraph, and I think oftentimes the main point gets lost because we get caught up on talking about Abishag. but it emphasizes the main point of the paragraph. David is king, but David is old and frail. He's so weak that he needs help just to be warm. He's close to death, and he really can't do a whole lot. And in this state, he doesn't appear to be doing a lot of ruling of his kingdom. He doesn't appear to be doing a whole lot of even directing things in the kingdom. His death is near, and it's time for one of his sons to become king and to sit on the throne of Israel. So this first paragraph sets the stage for what happens next. And what happens next isn't exactly right. So let's keep reading verse 5 and 6. He says, "Now Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. And he prepared for himself chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. His father had never at any time displeased him by asking, Why have you done thus and so? He was also a very handsome man, and he was born next after Absalom." And so Adonijah one day just decides that he will be king, and he starts acting like the king. I mean, he puts together this private security team. It's like a protective force to escort him around. He's got chariots, he has horsemen, he has 50 men that run in front of him. Now, who does this? The king. And so he has decided, I'm going to be king, and he starts acting like it. No one has made him king. No one has told him you're going to be king, but he chose to be, and he just starts doing it. Now, why would he do this? Well, it does appear that Adonijah is a little arrogant and just does whatever he wants. But why does he do that? Well, we're given 3 reasons. First of all, we're told that he is handsome. In other words, he's good looking, and he probably knows it. If you remember Absalom, this reminds me of Absalom, who was beautiful and had the hair. And this also reminds us of Saul. Remember Saul? He was handsome, he was tall. But Saul and Absalom are not the people you want to be like. But this kind of gives us a clue that Adonijah is similar maybe to Absalom and Saul. Good looking, but lacking in character, lacking in faithfulness to God. Well, the second thing we're told about Adonijah is that David never questioned what he did. Look again at the beginning of verse 6. He says, his father had never at any time displeased him by asking, Why have you done thus and so? And at first reading, you may think he's just talking about this instance, this situation. Why are you acting like king even though you're not king? But if you notice, it says, never at any time did David question him. What this is telling us is that David never disciplined his son. He never told him, don't do that. Why are you doing that? We know David had a problem with disciplining his sons. And here it shows itself again. And so Adonijah is used to doing just whatever he wanted. And the third reason we're told that he might do this is that he was David's oldest living son. He was the next oldest after Absalom. And so he probably just expects that because he's the oldest, he should be king. That's the way my brother would be. Sorry, I just had that thought as I was standing here. I just threw him under the bus, sorry. But he just expects that because he's the oldest, he should be king. Now, at this point, there's no established means for succession in Israel. I mean, there has been no successor to a king. Saul was king, and then David was king. And now David has a son, but which son? Nothing has been established. However, other nations, this is the way they did it. The oldest son just became king after their father. And so he just assumed that he should be king. And he did whatever he wanted. Was he arrogant and was he entitled? Well, yeah. But there's a bigger problem here. What's the bigger problem? We're told that he exalted himself, saying, I will be king. That's not how kings were made in Israel. That's not how kings were chosen in Israel. Now, who chose Saul to be king? You remember? Yeah, you can answer me.
God.
God. Who chose David to be king? God. And then the prophet Samuel anointed Saul. He anointed David to be king. So it was God's choice, and the prophet was involved. It's not up to Adonijah who will be king. It's not his choice to make. So then we would have to ask, well, who is God's choice? Well, this passage here does not tell us. But in 1 Chronicles 28:5, David says this. He says, "And of all my sons, for the Lord has given me many sons, he has chosen Solomon, my son, to sit on the throne of the kingdom of the Lord over Israel." And so what we have here is we have Adonijah just running ahead and doing his own will without asking or seeking the will of God. And that's not how a king in Israel is supposed to act. Let's keep reading verse 7 and 8. It says, "He conferred with Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and with Abiathar the priest, and they followed Adonijah and helped him. But Zadok the priest, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and Nathan the prophet, and Shammai and Rai, and David's mighty men were not with Adonijah." And so Adonijah made some good political moves. He gained the support of some important leaders. He went out and he got Joab and Abiathar, who had been with David since the beginning, to join up with him. See, Joab was a military leader, and Abiathar was the high priest, and so they have great power and influence in Israel. Of course, different kinds of power and influence, but both had great power and influence in Israel. And so he convinced them to join with him and to help him. On the other hand, we're told that there are some important leaders who did not join up with with Adonijah. We have Zadok, who is also a priest, who has been with David for a long time. We have David's personal army, his mighty men, and they have great power, and they are loyal to David. And then we have Nathan the prophet. Now, Nathan the prophet is the one who, so one day David and Nathan were hanging out, they were sitting, and David told Nathan his plans, his idea. I want to build a house for the Lord. I want to build a temple for God. And Nathan then is the one who God sent a message back to David through. And so Nathan told him that God says, no, you're not going to build my house, your son will. But he blessed him and he says, and I'm going to build a house for you. In other words, God promised through Nathan the prophet that David would have a dynasty, that his sons would sit on the throne. Of course, that dynasty ultimately looks forward to Jesus. And so Nathan gave that promise. Nathan is also the prophet who came and confronted David after his sin with Bathsheba and after killing Uriah the Hittite. And then Nathan the prophet is the one through whom God sent a message to David about Solomon, saying that he loved Solomon in a special way. So these Zadok and the mighty men and Nathan, and these are loyal to David, and they won't take part in this coup of Adonijah's. Now, they probably weren't asked to take part, and they probably weren't asked because because Adonijah knew that they wouldn't take part in it. And we'll see how that goes. But Adonijah still moves forward with his plans to make himself king. Look at verse 9 and 10. It says, Adonijah sacrificed sheep, oxen, and fattened cattle by the serpent stone, which is beside En Rogel. And he invited all his brothers, the king's sons, and all the royal officials of Judah. But he did not invite Nathan the prophet, or Benaiah, or the mighty men, or Solomon his brother. So Adonijah holds a banquet. It's basically a banquet to say, okay, I'm king. It's his coronation banquet, if you will. But he holds this big banquet, and he invites all these strategic people in addition to those he already had supporting him. And so all of his brothers, all the princes of Israel come. And this is important because by them being there at this banquet in his honor, it was as if they were saying, we are supporting you. So they are submitting to him as king. So the other princes of Israel are supporting Adonijah as king. and submitting to him. Also, the royal officials are there in order to make it official by giving their consent to what is happening as well. But again, we are told about some important people who were not invited, and it suggests that they weren't invited because they knew that these were a threat to the plan. See, Nathan wasn't invited, and Nathan, the prophet, he had religious authority, and he might challenge Adonijah's plan and say, you are not God's choice. You also had the mighty men and their leader Benaiah, who had military authority and might call Adonijah's plan an act of disloyalty or treason against David. You also had Solomon, who was not invited. And Solomon, the fact that Solomon, with all of the other brothers were invited, but not Solomon, suggests that Adonijah knew something. See, if all of his brothers were invited except for Solomon, it suggests that he knew that Solomon was the potential rival heir. That maybe he was supposed to be king. And he might challenge the legitimacy of Adonijah's claim to the throne. But Adonijah thought that he had enough support and he could take that throne even with a little opposition. And he also thought it was the right thing for him to do, that it was his place. But it wasn't. It would make sense. I mean, if you followed just conventional wisdom of the world or of the nations around them, well, this is just the way we do it. The oldest son becomes the king. And the others got behind him for those reasons. And maybe because he was good looking, they decided to follow. And maybe they just assumed if they were in good with the new king, it might be good for them. Because we know that's the way Joab does things. He does whatever's good for him. But what's interesting is no one asked David. No one asked the king who should be king after you. And even more importantly, no one asked God. You see, there's more to being a leader of God's people. Whether you're talking back in Israel's, in this time, in David's time, or if you're talking about today, even in the church. There's more to being a leader of God's people than wanting to be in charge. There's more to it than having good looks. There's more to it too than being able to get other people to follow you. You see, God looks at the heart. God is concerned with a person's character. Even in the New Testament, we're talking about, when we talk about elders, David talks about it. He says, you know what? It's good if a person aspires to be an elder. It's good. It's a good thing if they want to be a leader in the church, to be an elder. But you also have to meet these godly characteristics. You have to meet these godly character qualities. But that also means that we need to be careful who we put into leadership in the church. I mean, here we had Adonijah was able to get a lot of people to come and say, oh yeah, let's make him king. Let's make him the leader. We need to be careful who we put into leadership. We need to ask God first. And we need to consider first and foremost what God wants. Well, things were headed the wrong way in Israel. So someone had to step up and make sure that things were done right. Look at verse 11. Then Nathan said to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, have you not heard that Adonijah, the son of Haggith, has become king, and David our Lord does not know it? Now therefore, come, let me give you advice that you may save your own life and the life of your son Solomon. Go in at once to King David and say to him, Did you not, my lord the king, swear to your servant, saying, Solomon your son shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne? Why then is Adonijah king? Then while you are still speaking with the king, I also will come in after you and confirm your words. And so, not only was Solomon not invited to this banquet that Adonijah is happening, but his parents didn't even know about it, know about what was happening. there was a coup in progress, and this put Solomon and Bathsheba's lives in danger. See, because what would a king do? When a new king came to power, he would then eliminate all of his rivals. That was a normal thing to do back then. And so any threat to his throne would be eliminated, taken out of the way. And so most likely this is what Adonijah would have done. But somehow Nathan found out about it, and he jumps into action. He immediately goes to Bathsheba and he tells her what she needs to do to get David to act. And something had to be done, and it had to be done right away, or the wrong person would become king over God's people. And we have this clear statement. It's clear that at some point David had told Bathsheba that Solomon would be king. But apparently he hadn't made his choice public. He hadn't made it known to the public. Let's keep reading, verse 15. So Bathsheba went to the king in his chamber. Now the king was very old, and Abishag the Shunammite was attending to the king. Bathsheba bowed and paid homage to the king and said, and the king said, "What do you desire?" She said to him, "My lord, you swore to your servant by the Lord your God, saying, Solomon your son shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne. And now behold, Adonijah is king, although you, my lord the king, do not know it. He has sacrificed oxen, fattened cattle, and sheep in abundance, and has invited all the sons of the king, Abiathar the priest, and Joab the commander of the army. But Solomon your servant he has not invited. And now, my lord the king, the eyes of all Israel are on you to tell them who shall sit on the throne of my lord the king after him. Otherwise, it will come to pass when my lord the king sleeps with his fathers that I and my son Solomon will be counted offenders." And so she goes in humbly before David. And David is weak, but not too much that he can't acknowledge her. And he asks her what she is wanting. And she reminds him of the promise that he made, and tells him what Adonijah is doing, which of course is against David's wishes. And she also tells who is supporting him, and that he is setting himself up as king. And she asserts this, that if David doesn't do something and do it quickly, that this will happen. It'll all be done. And there would be nothing that anyone could do about it. So she adds these two more important points. The first is that Israel is waiting for him, for David, to announce who will be king. And secondly, she says that she and her son Solomon were in danger. See, because they would be considered criminals for not being there at the banquet, or not being supportive of Adonijah, the new king. Keep reading verse 22. While she was still speaking with the king, Nathan the prophet came in, and they told the king, "Here is Nathan the prophet." And when he came in before the king, he bowed before the king with his face to the ground. And Nathan said, "My lord the king, have you said, Adonijah shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne? For he has gone down this day, and has sacrificed oxen, fattened cattle, and sheep in abundance, and has invited all the king's sons, and commanders of the army, and Abiathar the priest. And behold, they are eating and drinking before him, saying, Long live King Adonijah. But me, your servant, and Zadok the priest, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and your servant Solomon, he has not invited. Has this thing been brought about by my lord the king, and you have not told your servants who should sit on the throne of my lord the king after him?" And so before David can respond to Bathsheba, or question her about anything that she said, or before he could just do nothing about it, because that's the way David often responds to problems with his sons, do nothing. And then things just escalate. But before any of that could happen, or before nothing could happen, Nathan shows up. And Nathan comes in, and he comes in humbly but boldly, and he questions David. He's like, did you order this? Did you say that he should be king? Because that's what's happening. Whether you did or not, that's what's happening. And this seems to imply that David isn't in control of his kingdom and that he needs to get control of it. But then he also asks, did you order this without telling us, your loyal servants? You know, because we were all left out of this. We're not a part of it. And this implies that there's treason happening. That those who are most loyal to David were not involved. But again, it's all happening anyway. And David needs to do something to stop this wrong that is happening. Verse 28. Then King David answered, call Bathsheba to me. And so she came into the king's presence and stood before the king. And the king swore, saying, as the Lord lives, he who has redeemed my soul out of every adversity, as I swore to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, saying, Solomon your son shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne in my place. Even so will I do this day. Then Bathsheba bowed with her face to the ground and paid homage to the king and said, may my Lord King David live forever. So David responds, and he moves to action. He calls Bathsheba back in, and he says, I will do what I promised you. But he says, I will do it today. In other words, I'm going to do it right now. Verse 32, King David said, call to me Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada. So they came before the king, and the king said to them, take with you the servants of your Lord, and have Solomon my son ride on my own mule, and bring him down to Gihon, and let Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet there anoint him king over Israel. Then blow the trumpet and say, long live King Solomon. You shall then come up after him, and he shall come and sit on my throne, for he shall be king in my place. And I have appointed him to be ruler over Israel and over Judah. And Benaiah the son of Jehoiada answered the king, amen. May the Lord, the God of my lord the king, say so. As the Lord has been with my lord the king, even so may he be with Solomon, and make his throne greater than the throne of my lord King David. And so he calls these loyal servants, his loyal subjects, in, the ones who didn't go to the banquet with Adonijah. And he tells them to go and make Solomon king, and he gives them the details of the steps to take. First, they are to publicly honor him. Solomon is to be publicly honored by David, and this is shown by the fact that he's going to ride on David's own personal mule, the royal mule. And so, secondly, he is then to be anointed by the priest and the prophet. Then they are to blow the trumpets to signal his coronation, that he is being made king, and declare, long live King Solomon. And then they are to take him and have him sit on David's throne, symbolizing that he is now replacing David as king. And just to make it clear, David makes a statement, I have appointed him to be king, to rule over Israel. So he is David's official choice. And when we read this paragraph, we almost forget about the fact that David is weak and frail, because he sounds so forceful and so direct. And it appears that David is very passionate about the kingdom. He's very passionate about this dynasty that God has promised to him. And he responds to the threat with strength. Well, let's keep reading. Verse 38. So Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada and the Cherethites and the Pelethites went down and had Solomon ride on King David's mule, and brought him to Gihon. And there Zadok the priest took the horn of oil from the tent and anointed Solomon. Then they blew the trumpet, and all the people said, long live King Solomon. And all the people went up after him, playing on pipes and rejoicing with great joy, so that the earth was split by their noise. So they did exactly what David told them to do, and the people immediately join in and start rejoicing about it. They're celebrating it. And apparently Israel really was waiting to see who David would appoint to be king. And when they find out, when they see it, they celebrate together. In fact, the celebration is so loud that the ground shook. It literally says that the ground split open. You know, kind of like when you have an earthquake and the ground literally splits open. This was a ground splitting noise. It was earth shattering. Okay, so it's being used figuratively here, an exaggeration, but he's saying it was like an earthquake. They were celebrating so hard that you could feel it in the ground. It shook. But not everyone was cheering right now. Adonijah and those with him became very afraid. Look at verse 41. Adonijah and all the guests who were with him heard it as they finished feasting. And when Joab heard the sound of the trumpet, he said, "What does this uproar in the city mean?" While he was still speaking, behold, Jonathan, the son of Abiathar, the priest, came. And Adonijah said, "Come in, for you are a worthy man, and bring good news." Jonathan answered Adonijah, "No, for our Lord King David has made Solomon king. And the king has sent with him Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and the Cherethites and the Pelethites. And they had him ride on the king's mule. And Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet have anointed him king at Gihon. And they have gone up from there rejoicing, so that the city is in an uproar. This is the noise that you have heard. Solomon sits on the royal throne. Moreover, the king's servants came to congratulate our Lord King David, saying, May your God make the name of Solomon more famous than yours, and make his throne greater than yours. And the king bowed himself on the bed, and the king also said, Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who has granted someone to sit on my throne this day, my own eyes seeing it. And so Adonijah and all the important people with him at his banquet, they're not too far away from where Solomon is being crowned. And suddenly they hear this noise coming from Jerusalem. And Joab is the first person to say anything, which is totally understandable. He's the military guy. He's the one who's always on watch. He's always ready for action, ready for something to happen, listening for trouble. And he hears it and he says, What is going on? And just then Jonathan shows up, and apparently Jonathan had seen everything that had happened in the city, and he comes in and reports it. It basically tells him that David has made Solomon king, and he gives all those details, including the people rejoicing and the royal officials congratulating David and blessing Solomon, asking God to give him success. And all of this shows that it's official. This isn't just something that somebody did like Adonijah, but this is official. And the people of Israel are happy about it, and it's done. And he also makes it clear that David has sanctioned this by telling them how even though he's in his bed, he bowed and praised God that he has been able to live to see the beginning of the promised dynasty. One of his sons sitting on his throne. Now look at verse 49. It says, Then all the guests of Adonijah trembled and rose, and each went his own way. Party's over. All the people with Adonijah all of a sudden realize they're not in a good place. We could be considered treasonous, conspirators against the throne. We're not in a good place. We could be considered guilty of sedition for supporting a rival to the king. And so they're scared and they scattered. And I can just imagine all these people taking off in different directions and trying to hurriedly get home or out of the area to act all nonchalant, like, oh no, I wasn't with Adonijah. I wasn't part of that. But they're just going in different directions. They scatter. They're immediately distancing themselves from Adonijah as quickly as they can. Verse 50. And Adonijah feared Solomon, so he arose and went and took hold of the horns of the altar. Then it was told Solomon, behold, Adonijah fears King Solomon, for behold, he has laid hold of the horns of the altar, saying, let King Solomon swear to me first that he will not put his servant to death with the sword. And Solomon said, if he will show himself a worthy man, not one of his hairs shall fall to the earth. But if wickedness is found in him, he shall die. So King Solomon sent, and they brought him down from the altar, and he came and paid homage to King Solomon. And Solomon said to him, go to your house. In other words, it's okay, go home. But Adonijah here, he fears for his life. You see, he assumes that Solomon will kill him, just like he was planning to do to Solomon. He assumes that Solomon will kill any rival to the throne, just like he would have. And so he runs into the altar and he grabs a hold of the altar. Now, this was a common thing at that time that people might do if they had committed an inadvertent crime. And so it was kind of like going and seeking asylum under God's protection until a fair trial could be held. And so that's what he's doing. Adonijah has run in there, grabbed hold of the altar. He's seeking asylum from Solomon, and he wants Solomon to promise before God that he won't kill him. And when he makes a statement, he refers to himself as Solomon's servant, suggesting that he is submitting to Solomon and will continue to submit to Solomon as king. And when Solomon hears this, when he's told about it, Solomon makes him a conditional promise. He promises that Adonijah will not be harmed at all as long as he is a worthy man. But if he acts wickedly, he will be put to death. So it's a two-part promise. You're going to go one way or the other. If you do right, you're good. If you do wrong, you're toast. And so he says it's your choice to make. But so in other words, his fate depends, Adonijah's fate depends on whether he is a worthy or whether he is wicked. And this specifically is in reference to his loyalty to Solomon as king. So as long as he does submit to Solomon, as his calling himself servant implied, as long as he really does submit to Solomon and act loyal to Solomon and do what's right, then he's fine. He will live. But he has already shown the fact that he wants to be king. He's already tried to become king. And so they know he has this desire. He's attempted to do it. And if he shows himself to be disloyal in any way, then he will be put to death for treason. Well, that's where we're going to stop today. But there's something that I notice in this chapter. There are a whole lot of people doing stuff. But there's no mention of God doing anything in this chapter. But that doesn't mean that God isn't doing anything. He's there, and he's working in the background. I mean, things like when Nathan somehow learns about this banquet that they weren't invited to. And he learns about it just in time to go get David and have him stop it. And how the son that everyone expected to be king didn't become king. And the only son who wasn't invited to the banquet became king. Things that just don't happen. And I was thinking about this. This situation reminds me a lot of Joseph and his brothers. You know, Joseph, the younger brother who was disregarded by his brothers, but then was later elevated to ruling over them. The one God chose was elevated. You know, sometimes in life, like in these stories, it looks like people are directing all of the activity. It looks like people are directing everything that's happening and making all the decisions without any mention of God's direct intervention. But he's there. and he is moving in the background. He's moving, he's acting behind the scenes. God is sovereign. And oftentimes we look back and we can see his sovereignty. His providence is evident. We often find ourselves in situations where something has to be done. A situation where a decision has to be made, where action is required. And my challenge for you this morning is be more like Nathan than Adonijah. By that I mean, ask God. Ask what God would want. Consider his will, not just your own. And look to honor God, not just to exalt yourself. When something has to be done, do it right and honor God.